Hi, everyone. I'm Connie Zabel-Schmucker. I'm Advocacy Director at Bicycle Garage Indy. Welcome to Bicycling Lunch and Learn. This is our last Lunch and Learn for 2023, and we'll start them back up, I think, either in January or February. We'll go through October. A couple of things. If you have any questions that come up or any comments you want to make, put them in the chat and we'll cover them either during the presentation or afterwards, depending on whether they apply right then or not. Couple of dates to keep in mind. We have the last active transportation meetup, formerly known as Bike and Breakfast, on the 19th of this month, October 19th, on Thursday from 7 to 8 at Tinker Coffee on Market Street. And so, feel free to come and meet other active transportation folks. I think most of them have been bicyclists who have shown up. That's also going to be our last one for this year, and it was an experiment this year, and so it's still undecided whether we'll do those starting in April. So look for emails and Facebook events if you're interested in those. And then lastly is the Bike to the Polls or Ride to the Polls event on October 21st, which is a Saturday from 10 to 2. There will be staffed bicycle parking at the City County building for people who want to ride their bike to go vote in Marion County. So thankful for Bike Indianapolis for helping coordinate that. And the Bicycling Lunch and Learns are a program collaborative effort of Bicycle Garage Indy, Bike Indianapolis, Central Indiana Bicycling Association, and Commuter Connect. So welcome, and I'm going to turn this over to Roy for his presentation about riding in the cold and dark, which if you were riding in the past week, we got a good taste of earlier darkness in the mornings and in the evenings, as well as colder temperatures. So I'm going to turn this over to Roy. Thank you, Roy.
Yeah, you're welcome. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Roy Sparks. I am a avid cyclist and a active bike commuter. I bike probably on average about 3,200 miles a year. I ride every month of the year. And so I've learned quite a bit. I moved to Indianapolis in 2015, so I've been commuting in the cold and dark for the last 8 years. So I'm going to share some of my tips for riding in the cold and dark. And we'll start. I kind of categorize this by 4 L's to make it kind of more fun to go through the slides. But we're going to cover layers, and then we'll cover lights, logistics, and then the last and probably one of the more important elements, how you can learn to love riding in the cold and dark. So with layers, there are several, websites out there that you can take a look at. However, I think the most comprehensive site is by a company called 45 North. They are a company out of, I believe, Minneapolis area, and they have a pretty comprehensive guide on what to wear when biking in the cold and dark. And if I can flip my screen over here, I'll just briefly share that site. And to kind of give you a flavor, I'm not going to go through this whole thing, but it kind of gives you an idea of, what you should consider riding at various temperature levels. One of the things that I really like about this website is this part right here. They have suggestions at various temperature categories. And I found this to be very helpful. So feel free to go to to this 45 North page and check that out. It's very comprehensive and provides a lot of additional detailed information beyond what I would share today. One of the things that I found very helpful, this first asterisk down here, is to keep a log. It's kind of tough to remember year to year what your preferred equipment and clothing choices are for various temperature levels. So if you keep a log on what worked, what didn't work at various temperature levels, that's very helpful from year to year. If you're getting into riding in the cold and dark and you don't own a lot of cycling specific gear, I always tell people to try to use, if you're a skier or if you already have some other types of winter gear, try to use that gear that you already own to help defray some of the cost of acquiring new gear. When you buy gear, I always suggest, buying it off season or on sale, of course. Typically, cycling manufacturing, usually I believe the new seasons typically start midsummer. And so, you're going to find a lot of good winter gear on sale between the end of winter and the beginning of summer. So look for those sales out there that probably, we're talking March to July timeframe. You'll typically find some sales going on so you can acquire new gear. And the last thing I want to state here before we go on to the layers is, do not overdress. If you haven't ridden in the cold and dark before, that's one of the key things to keep in mind, is you do not want to overheat. That just ends up making you sweat more, and that sweat will rob your body of heat and you'll feel a lot cooler than you need to. Let's talk about gloves. Gloves are kind of like the holy grail of cycling. It's if you get winter gloves and they don't work well, you're going to know it right away. If you find a good pair of gloves, you love them, and eventually you got to replace them, and invariably that manufacturer will have moved on and made a different model. So finding a new set can be a little challenging at times. But the idea of gloves is that you don't want them to be tight, and you also want to wear those in layers. And you achieve this layering concept, which helps trap air between under your glove by using a glove liner. I recommend wool glove liners. Their Smart Wool makes several options of glove liners, and so I most always wear glove liners when the temperatures drop below 50 degrees, and then I'll change the glove that I wear on top depending on the temperatures. So if it's like 40 to 50 degrees, I have a lighter winter glove. It becomes a lot less critical if it's above 40 degrees. Once it gets below 40 degrees, for me, that's when I switch to a heavier winter glove and the glove liner. And if you have a really good winter glove, you won't have a problem. A couple things to consider that can ruin your experience with gloves is if your gloves are too tight. You won't want tight gloves. Tight gloves have a tendency to push the blood out of your hands and will make your hands cold. So I always suggest to people, if you can try gloves on before you buy them, that's the best thing if you're worried about the size, or if you're right on the border between like a size medium or size large. Go try on the gloves if you can. The other thing that I've noted is, because I have a couple different winter bike setups that I use for riding in the winter, and if you have a poor bike fit, which causes you to overgrip your handlebars, that will also make your hands cold. It'll force the blood out of your hands. There are other options to gloves. There are things called bar mitts and pogies, which are temporarily attached over your handlebars, and you slide your hands into them to access your grips and brake levers and whatnot. So that is an option. I know a couple people that bar mitts is a brand. Pogies is a reference to the same type of device. Some people really love those. I personally don't use bar mitts or pogies, but it is an option. I would say on gloves, my personal experience and what I like in a glove and gloves that I find to be effective, there is definitely a what I would say a minimum price range you want to look at. If you definitely north of $100 for the gloves. That's my experience. If you get gloves that cost less than $100 and you're biking in sub 40, sub 30-degree temperatures, you're probably not going to be happy with the glove. Moving on to head coverings. So I do not get a specific winter helmet. I use the same helmet that I wear in the summer, and I just add layers underneath the helmet. Um, this technique is pretty good. You just got to be one of those people that makes sure that, if you're right at the upper limit of your helmet size, which, like, I think the most manufacturers, like 59 centimeters is the break point between a medium and a large. So if you're like right at 59, um, that's really going to limit what you can fit under your helmet. So you may have to use a slightly bigger helmet if you want to layer. So I usually use a summer beanie and a buff um, when it's in the 40-degree, 50-degree range. Once it gets down into the 30s, I have a smart wool beanie that I use, which is really great. Again, most of my layers in the winter, I try to make them merino wool layers. Uh, Merino wool has a nice, interesting property that it can absorb 30% of its weight in moisture and still remain thermally effective. Whereas if you use, you know, like cold Under Armour cold gear, synthetic type of gear, uh, if they get saturated, they become less effective at keeping you warm. So again, I would always recommend if you can afford the wool, use the merino wool as an option when you're layering. When it gets down into the 25 to 30-degree range, that's when I usually add a balaclava, and I may put a buff over the top of that, or even that same smart wool beanie over the top of the balaclava. It's very helpful to keep your ears warm by layering with a balaclava. Once you get below 25 degrees, I have a heavy wool beanie that I use with the balaclava. Um, One of the other options you could do is put a cover over your helmet. I don't personally do that. I've seen people do that. I'm assuming those trap heat in and are breathable, probably. So that can be an option too if you don't have a lot of room under your helmet for 2 or 3 layers. It might be helpful just to put a cover over the top of your summer helmet. And by the way, as we click through these slides, I went through and these are just things that I've used. So I've included links to show examples of what I'm talking about on these slides. So feel free to check those out if you'd like. Feet coverings. I'd say that I ride flat pedal shoes when I commute. When I first started commuting, probably for the first year, I was clipping in with clipless pedals, and I found that to be quite a hassle, especially once you get downtown. If you're on the cultural trail, you have to stop every block or every other block for a stoplight and clipping in and clipping out where you're going across the crosswalk. I just found to be annoying. So I just put flat pedals on all my commuter bikes, which makes it helpful when you ride in the winter. It gives you more options as to what kind of shoe you can wear because it doesn't have to be cycling specific once you go to a flat pedal. So if you already have a good pair of winter boots or insulated footwear, hiking shoes or whatever, uh, by all means try those when you're biking in the winter. Wool socks, again, I love wool. I have wool socks. I typically use smart wool socks. And again, I always wear those once we get south of 50 degrees. And I have a summer shoe that I wear probably all the way down to 40, mid 40s. Once it gets below 45 degrees, that's where I go to a heavier wool sock. There are several manufacturers that make uh, wool, winter wool socks. You can even, if you have, for example, if you're a skier or a snowboarder and you have those over the calf wool socks, those are great. I have a couple pairs of those that I use in this category when it gets below 45 degrees. You can also add a shoe cover or go to over your summer shoe or add or just transition to a winter type of shoe when it gets down below 40 degrees. So that's what I do. I have a set of I think I put a link on here. Yeah, down here, this last link, I actually use a Vans high top MTE winter shoe. It's insulated, has a waterproof membrane on it, and it also has a boa lace closure on it, which I love boas, just because it's easier to get dressed and get out the door in the morning. Um, so feel free to use shoes you already own. Once it gets below 30 degrees, that's when I'll add a toe warmer over the top of my winter Vans shoe. And if it gets, and if I'm biking and it's below 25 degrees, I'll stick a chemical toe warmer underneath that toe cover. Um, and that's usually more than enough to get me to work. It takes me about a little over an hour to ride from my house to get to work. And that's usually more than enough to get me to work without my feet getting cold. I've typically, coldest I've ridden to work is typically in the upper teens. I think around 17, 18 degrees has been my coldest commute. Um, and that setup works great in that temperature range. Torso coverings. Now, I will say that I'm probably, if God was going to create the perfect bike commuter body type and metabolism and sweat rate, He wouldn't have made me. You know, I sweat quite a bit, and so this is a constant battle for me. I'm probably the worst case scenario when it comes to somebody trying to bike in the winter. Uh, because I have a tendency to saturate base layers. That's part of the reason I use wool. So when it comes to torso coverings, that's probably one of the most important wool layers that I have is a wool base layer. I have short sleeve base layers, I have long sleeve base layers, and then I also buy wool long sleeve jerseys that I wear. Once we get south of 50 down into the 40s, everything I wear on my torso as a base layer in jersey is wool. Once it gets below like 40 degrees, you can get a lightweight, breathable rain shell um, to put over the top to help give you some wind protection, especially if it's you're starting to get some wind and some wind chill. And once that get below 30 degrees, I actually have a heavier jacket, breathable jacket made by Showers Pass that I wear, which really cuts down on the wind. I also do add a second base layer once it gets below freezing down around in the upper 20s. I'll put a second wool base layer under my jersey. And I find that that's really helpful in keeping me warm, especially with the fact that I really can't avoid, you know, over sweating when it gets below, you know, 40, 50 degrees. So I really have to have wool base layers in order to keep myself warm. As far as like below the waist leg coverings, I typically rock summer bibs and leg warmers down to 50 degrees. Um, Once it gets below 50, that's when I found, especially when you get down around 40, like we did. I rode yesterday, I think it was 39 degrees. And that's when it's kind of critical that you switch to a winter style bib or winter style knicker, just because I find that you just get too cold, your hips get cold, your back gets cold. And so getting a winter specific bib and knicker is something you really should do. And then once it gets below 25 degrees, I'll add a bike pant over the top of my uh, knickers. And that really is helpful when you get below 25 degrees to stay warm. Now getting into lights, how you see and how you can be seen. So I typically recommend to folks that it is very worth your time to have two headlights on your bike, whether you're using both of them at the same time or not. Having a backup light is very important. As a bike commuter, um, there are very few months of the year when I actually ride into work and it's light outside. I don't, I think, oh, I, I think it's like usually around the end of May before before it's like sunrise when I'm leaving. I usually leave my house around 20 after 6 in the morning. And I got to wait till almost the end of May before it's fully light when I leave my house. And you really only have, um, June, July, and most of August. And then once it hits the end of September, it starts getting significantly dark again um, in the window when I leave to do my bike ride. So that said, I always recommend to people because 75% of the months you're riding in the dark, have a backup light. I handle bar mount my lights because I don't like having a light on my helmet. I don't like the extra weight. It annoys me. So I handle bar mount mine. The other thing you can do is have a just like one of those headlamp hiker lights that you can keep in your bag or keep in your jersey pocket in case you do get a flat. That way you can use that, put on your head so you have light while your hands are free in case you do get a flat, you can fix it. Um, when we get in the be seen element, that's where we're talking about tail lights and reflective elements. Uh, have a good tail light on the back of your bike, something that's very bright, has like a variable flash to it. I find that to be extremely helpful in getting cars' attention. And I also you have a second tail light with me as well. Sometimes I use both tail lights. I clip one onto the rear, um, basically the rear rack of my bike, and then I might clip one on a jersey pocket or a shell pocket and run two tail lights. It really depends if I'm riding alone or riding with others. If I'm riding alone, I typically will have both tail lights flashing. If I'm riding with a group of people, I usually have one. As far as reflective elements go, that's super critical. Riding in the dark, you need reflective elements on your clothing. You need reflective elements on your bike, your shoes, uh, reflective elements that are moving, catch people's attention. So having reflective elements on your shoes, your bibs, shoe covers is super important to consider doing that. Highly recommend it. As far as I always recommend that, when it comes to lights, um, like tail lights, headlights, you need to have multiple reflective elements on your clothing, and that can be achieved by your outerwear, and it can be achieved by like adding a reflective band around your ankle, or reflective bands around your wrist, especially if you're turning a lot downtown. You're sticking your arm out, having something reflective on your glove or your wrist is helpful to get drivers' attention in case they're not paying attention. And I also use reflective stickers on my bike. Um, I have fenders, and so I use different color reflective stickers, red and white, on my rear fenders. I use reflective stickers on my head tube, on the side. On my flat pedals, I have reflective stickers on my flat pedals on both sides, so it doesn't matter which orientation I have my pedals. People can see me at night. Final thing is logistics. So I find it very helpful. Most people may need some motivation. I do, to get up and get up at 5:30 in the morning and get ready to go bike when it's freezing outside and in the dark and everybody else is still asleep in bed. So in order to help, I lay everything out the night before. Um, that way I know when I wake up in the morning, you know, to get out the door, I have minimal amount of time and effort to get out the door. So I will lay out everything: shoes, jackets, bibs, shirts. I have a little spot downstairs and by the door to the garage that I lay my stuff out the night before, so everything's laid out. Um, you need extra between summer commutes and winter commutes because you have these extra layers and socks and everything you have to put on. It takes me about 10 minutes longer to actually get ready when it's cold outside. Um, the other thing I would always recommend people, if you can put a wider tire on your bike, I recommend you do that. Um, and if you have the option to run tubeless, um, I would recommend that as well. That way, you can minimize the risk of getting a flat. Getting a flat in the winter is miserable. I can tell you once you take your gloves off and you have to change if you're running tubes and you get a flat, your hands will get cold. And I've had that happen a couple times. And when you get the flat changed and you get ready to ride again, man, your hands don't seem to warm up again. Your hands are cold the rest of the ride. So if you can go tubeless, you have that option. That's something to consider. Um, Personally, I have two bikes, one's tubeless, um, and then I have a road bike that I can put 28. I have 28 millimeter wide tires on, and you can actually SRAM has a nice website. I don't have the link in this presentation, but SRAM has a website on tire pressures, and you basically put in your tire type and width and your weight and your bike weight and whatnot. It'll give you recommended pressures for those tires. And you'd be surprised at how low pressure you can actually run on some tires. So on my 28 millimeter wide tires, I can run I could run as low as 80 PSI on that. And so that helps give you better grip in the winter and also makes it a little more comfortable ride. Fenders, if you got fenders, I would always recommend using them. It just keeps the muck off your bike and makes it easier to clean because once it gets cold enough outside and you have to pull the holes, you don't have a hose to you can wash your bike outside. Then I got to do a little sponge bath cleaning in the garage, and that's difficult. So having fenders on your bike makes the process of keeping your bike clean in the winter really easier. Um, Five, this is something I added this year to this PowerPoint. Moisturizing your face and using lip balm. It's always good once it gets cold outside to use some moisturizer on your face and use lip balm before you depart on your ride. I find it actually keeps my face warmer if I moisturize it. And then the last thing, of course, depending on your lights, carry extra batteries with you just in case your light dies. You don't want your tail light. My tail lights are battery operated. My headlights are rechargeable, so I carry extra batteries with me just in case. For some reason, my tail light batteries die during the ride. I typically am proactive on that. I usually change my batteries um, once a month, whether they need them to be changed or not. So I never have that happen to me. Then the last L, learning to love it. I talked about laying your gear out and that how that it is fairly effective for me to help get me going in the morning. If you can find somebody to ride with, um, that is pressure is a great motivator. Somebody's going to count on you to show up and meet you. So I would say, probably 90% of my rides in the morning, I'm riding with at least one other person and up to six, seven other people. So having somebody to ride with you is great, not only for accountability, but when you're riding in the cold and dark, you have somebody there for conversation. The rides go a lot faster, and having somebody there if you have a flat, it's really helpful to have that extra set of hands and that extra light to help you while you're changing your tube. Um, then the last thing I'd like to mention, is that if you haven't ridden in the cold and dark in Indianapolis, it's a unique opportunity to see the city in a different way. It's very quiet most of the time. You get to see animals that you normally wouldn't see especially in the winter, like fox. I've seen foxes. I've seen all kinds of owls. I've seen coyotes. I've seen deer. Um, it's just a opportunity to connect in a different way to the city. Um, One of the things I mentioned too is, if you have an iPhone, you can create focuses on your phone. So I actually have a cycling focus that I activate on my commutes that just, it allows me to display just the apps that I use and to mute non-essential or non-needed notifications. So I'm not distracted when I ride in the mornings. And there's a picture of the people I ride with most of the time. So we're part of the Fall Creek Flyers. So if you live on the northeast side of Indianapolis and you're interested in riding your bike downtown and commuting to work, feel free to reach out. That's it. Any questions?
Yeah, so we did not get any questions in the chat. So if you have any questions, feel free to either raise your hand or unmute yourself and ask away. I've got, let's see. So one of the things that I have done is I, a long time ago, thought I needed a winter cycling jacket, and I started doing a lot of layers and wind jackets and rain jackets as my wind layer on top. And I've found now that that gives me a lot more flexibility, and I don't need a cycling specific winter jacket because I have all of these other layers that serve that same purpose. So yeah, and somebody asked if a recording will be made available. Yes, it will. So we'll post that on the Lunch and Learn webpage. So I'll put that in the chat as well, what the webpage is. And just so you know, all of the Lunch and Learns that we have recorded, I think since the spring of 2021, are available on that page. So you can look on there for previous topics as well. We have a question about talking about dealing with ice or potential ice.
Sure. Yeah. So I don't ride on ice. This picture that you see here, this is a light snow that happened. It really depends on your bike and your tire setup. This is, one of my bike rigs is a Surly Ogre. It has 2-inch tires with some tread on them that I use in the winter. And so if it is light snow like this, I will commute to work. But what I find is if you get too much snow, it becomes packed down on the trail, especially after the first day. And that packed snow gets quite slippery and icy. So I personally, you get into more than like a half an inch or an inch of snow, I won't ride my bike to work. That's how I handle the ice issue. I just don't ride on it. Depending on where you're riding, like if you're this picture is a Fall Creek Trail, so I ride the Fall Creek Trail down to the Monon, and I ride the Monon down to 10th Street. Then I get on the Cultural Trail and take that across the river. I work at Lilly, so I get then take the White River Trail down to basically Moore Street area. And one of the other things you got to be aware of too, especially after it snows and then it starts to warm up and melt. If your trail goes through a treed area where it doesn't get a lot of sunshine, that's where I find you got to be really careful riding in the dark. You got to be familiar with the spots where the snow doesn't melt and it's kind of icy, because you'll hit patches of like 50 yards where the snow hasn't melted yet, and it's kind of melted during the day and then refroze at night. And you can manage that. You just got to be aware of where they are so you can take the proper caution.
Thanks.
Great. Any other questions while we have Roy here?
If you want to ride on ice and snow, they do make tires that have metal studs in them. I personally haven't used those, but I do them. They make them, and there are people that use those, and I'm guessing they're fairly effective. at riding on light ice and packed snow. Nobody has any other questions? All right. Well,
Yeah. So
I guess
yeah, thank you all for coming, and we will see you next spring when we start these back up again. And have a great winter, and hopefully this will motivate you to get some winter and cold and dark rides out in the winter before the sun comes back after the spring, when spring starts back up. So thanks again, and thank you everyone for supporting the Bicycling Lunch and Learn. Like I said, the recording will be available, and it will be on our Lunch and Learn page. If you have any topics, feel free to email me with topics for next year, because we'll be deciding on the topics over the winter for 2024. So thank you very much. Have a great day.